I've talked about Adam Smith's argument that a free enterprise system is going to produce the best outcome for the entire community. Even if each person pursues their own self-interest, they're going to produce the best outcome for the group. Why? Well, they're going to try to get as much value for themselves as they can, being self-interested. And the way in such a system that you get value for yourself is that you produce value for others. So the way I can maximize my own welfare in a free enterprise system is by working to maximize the welfare of others. So in short, each of us is going to have an incentive to produce things of value for other people. We're going to have to do good for others in order to do good for ourselves. That means that if we each pursue our own self-interest, we're going to in fact attain the best outcome for the entire community. I've also talked about ways in which things might go wrong. We might have a tragedy of the commons, where my activity in pursuit of my self-interest not only produces value for somebody else, but actually imposes harms or risks of harm on somebody else, produces what is known as a negative externality. And there is the other problem related to stag hunts in game theory, where I may not be able to trust others enough to cooperate with them to even engage in the exchange of goods or services, or to band together with them in joint enterprises for mutual investment, or other large-scale enterprises that will force us each to be doing small things when we'd do much better by cooperating. Now, Smith is not unaware of these problems. He's all too aware of the problems that can afflict free enterprise systems. But, he says, be very careful. You might think that you can solve these problems by regulation, by legislation, by limiting people's liberty, by moving away from a free enterprise economy to something else. He says, I doubt it. You're probably wrong. Now, he can't prove that you are always going to do worse by doing something else. In fact, it looks as if, for example, if we limited our sheep's grazing on that common pasture, we could do better than if we all exploited the common pasture as much as possible. It would allow us to avoid that tragedy of the commons. If we all banded together and cooperated in pursuit of the stag, instead of going out our own way and pursuing various rabbits, we'd be better off. So surely we can reach agreements like that, can't we? Well, maybe sometimes. But be very careful, Smith says. Don't think that systematically you can do any better, because the same kinds of problems that affect free enterprise also affect other ways of doing things. Who guarantees that the regulations, the legislation, the limitations on liberty, the transferring of decisions from the individual people who are going to be taking part in these exchanges to someone else is going to lead to a better outcome? In short, you might say, the argument is this. Sometimes there actually is a better outcome than the one that will be attained by everybody pursuing their own self-interest. But there is no predictable, systematic way of finding that outcome and attaining it. And so sometimes, yes, there are better outcomes. But is there a better method for finding and attaining those outcomes? No. In fact, any alternative method is likely to do worse. Smith puts it this way, I've never known much good done by those who affected to trade for the public good. So those who say, look, I don't think pursuit of self-interest is actually maximizing here. I think we can do better by pursuing the public good directly. Says, I've never known that to work out very well. It's likely to fail. Now, why is that true? Here is Smith's argument. The general industry of the society never can exceed what the capital of the society can employ. As the number of workmen that can be kept in employment by any particular person must bear a certain proportion to his capital, so the number of those that can be continually employed by all the members of a great society must bear a certain proportion to the whole capital of that society, and never can exceed that proportion. No regulation of commerce can increase the quantity of industry in any society beyond what its capital can maintain. It can only divert a part of it into a direction into which it might not otherwise have gone. And it's by no means certain that this artificial direction is likely to be more advantageous to the society than that into which it would have gone of its own accord. Now we're going to come back to this point, but here's the key idea. In a capitalist system, in any free enterprise system, people are directing their labor and directing their investments in such a way as to give the best return to them. They typically are going to be doing that by trying to produce as much value as they can for other people. That's going to lead to the good of the community. They are going to benefit to the extent that they can benefit the community. And so it encourages them to benefit the community, indirectly, if you will, by benefiting themselves through such activity. Suppose we interrupt that. Suppose we say, I think we can do better in this way. We're going to be shifting some of that labor, some of that investment into some other direction. Will it produce a better outcome? Only if the people making decisions about the labor and about those investments are going to be more effective at producing the social good than the people who would have been doing it by virtue of trying to attain their own welfare. Well, should we trust other people to do it better? Now, in certain circumstances, yes, right? Suppose children inherit a large fortune. Adults are probably going to do a better job of investing that fortune than the child will. Suppose somebody who's quite skilled and experienced in a trade helps the apprentice decide what to work on, how to develop those skills, what kind of business direction to pursue. That person may be in a much better position to know. So certainly ignorance is something that can lead us astray, and the substitution of somebody who doesn't know what's going on by somebody who actually does know what's going on, yes, that can certainly improve the outcome for the group and the outcome for that individual. But assume we're talking about competent adults, those who actually are capable, are skilled, are intelligent about what's going to produce value for them through the production of value for others. Under what circumstances then can substituting somebody else's decision for theirs produce a better outcome? Now, Smith's point is not that free enterprise always produces the best outcome. We can prove that it does under certain conditions. And I say prove here strongly. There's a theorem in economics, the fundamental theorem of welfare economics, sometimes known as the Arrow-Debreu theorem, that says exactly that. But it does so only under certain conditions. If those conditions are not fulfilled, then we might not get the best outcome. But here's the thing, can we do better? Is there a system that enables us systematically, generally, with some degree of reliability to do better? Smith says no. There may be better outcomes in some cases, but there is no other system that more reliably finds the best outcome and more reliably obtains it. Well, what about those people, either out of altruism or because their job is legislation or regulation or something else, who try to do this, who try to pursue the common good, who are concerned about corporate social responsibility, or in some other way try to say, oh, we should give back to the community. We shouldn't be concerned with our own self-interest. Let's focus some on the good of the community overall, independently of our own self-interest. Smith says, I've never known that to work out very well. That's never produced much good. And here's why. He says, I've never known much good done by those who affected to trade for the public good. It is an affectation. Indeed, not very common among merchants, and very few words need to be employed in dissuading them from it. In other words, what does he mean? It's an affectation. He's saying, in other words, it's moral grandstanding. It is virtue signaling. It is not really something that produces a better outcome for the group. It's something where people signal their virtue by pretending to. Now, you might say, well, psychologically, maybe he's right about that, maybe not. But hey, maybe they succeed, whatever their purpose is. Maybe they're just grandstanding. But hey, if they're doing good by grandstanding, maybe that's all right. But Smith says, no, I don't think they are. Maybe sometimes they get lucky and do it, but it's unlikely. He says, for one thing, I don't think people are very sincere about this. But look, even if they were, it wouldn't work out systematically, reliably for the common good. Here's why. What is the species of domestic industry which his capital can employ and of which the produce is likely to be of the greatest value? Every individual, it's evident, can in his local situation judge much better than any statesman or lawgiver can do for him. The statesman who should attempt to direct private people in what manner they ought to employ their capitals would not only load himself with the most unnecessary attention, but assume an authority which could safely be trusted not only to no single person, but to no council or senate whatever, and which would nowhere be so dangerous as in the hands of a man who had folly and presumption enough to fancy himself fit to exercise it. What Smith is doing here, I think, is anticipating some arguments made later by Friedrich von Hayek in The Road to Serfdom. Hayek there is arguing against socialism, against the centralized conscious direction of social forces toward consciously chosen ends. But he does it in a way that's parallel, I think, to what Smith is saying. A similar argument is picked up by John Stuart Mill as well in On Liberty, when he's arguing that protecting people's liberty, allowing them to make their own free choices, is likely to produce a better outcome for everyone than trying to interfere with their free choices. As he puts it, it's because government is typically going to interfere wrongly and in the wrong place. Individual people know more about their situation and about their industry, about their profession, than any regulator is likely to know. Who do you trust more on carpentry? The carpenter or the senator who has strong views on carpentry? Who do you trust more on accounting? The professional accountants or the regulators whose job it is to tell accountants how they can do their jobs? Who do you trust more to produce excellent pizza for the entire society? The pizza makers, the ones who have been working on it for generations, or the people at the FDA who are regulating foods and drugs and looking at various things and saying, well, here is the amount of cheese you can use, here is this, and so on and so forth. You trust the people who are the experts in those fields. They are more likely to have the relevant knowledge. They're more likely to know what it is that will produce the most value for the most people. So they're going to do a better job through their own free choices and through their own pursuit of their own self-interest than anybody else is likely to be able to do by trying to substitute their less informed judgment for the judgment of the people who are actually in that situation. You might put it as Mill does. You know more about yourself and your situation and what will promote your own good than anybody else does. You know more about yourself and what will make you happy than your mother does, or your father does, or your brother or sister does. Certainly more than the governor does, the state legislator does, the mayor does, the senator does, and so on. Secondly, there's an argument about concern. You are going to care more about your own good than anybody else does. You care more about yourself than the president does care about you, than the senator or the representative cares about you, than the legislator or the governor or the mayor or the city council member cares about you. The result of that is that you care more about yourself than anybody else does. You know more about yourself and what will make you prosper than anyone else does. Consequently, you are the best judge of your own activities. So, can somebody else do a better job in a particular case? Yeah, you're not always right. You're not infallible. You're not God. But can they systematically, reliably do it? No. You're going to be more reliable than anybody else is at judging what's best for you. Now, there's a second part, I think, of Smith's argument, which has to do with that moral grandstanding, the affectation part. He says, look, anybody who would presume to do this should not be trusted to do it. Okay? Maybe there are circumstances where you're not doing what is in fact in your best interest. Or it is in your best interest, but it's not in the best interest of the society. Who is best capable of judging that? Well, he's already argued that you are. But what about those people who try to substitute their judgment? Who say, well, actually, the company contributes more to the common good if we do this or that, rather than just produce more of our product, or lower the price, or improve the quality. Instead, we should be spending money doing something else. Why should you trust that person to make that decision? Suppose it's even true that there is some better way of promoting the good of the community than improving your product or lowering your prices or improving the wages of your workers or doing something else you might do with that money that pertains to your business directly. Why do you trust that person to know what it is? To the extent that they think they know what it is, they're actually less trustworthy because they think they already know what's best for the community. Well, wait a minute, why should you trust that? Anybody who has the presumption to think they know what's best is somebody you shouldn't trust with this. Why? Because it's a complicated matter. It is something one ought to approach with epistemic humility. You should realize the good of the community. Look, it's hard enough to know what's in my own best interests, what's in the best interests of my company or my firm or this group of partners. It is immensely difficult to know what is in the best interests of society. Now, there are cases where the harm to someone else, the risk to someone else, and so on is obvious. And then what do? We pass laws. We say, well, yeah, you can't steal from other people. You can't kill other people. You can't do various other things that the law prohibits. And so there are going to be boundaries to our free activity, sure, and we'll encode those in the law. But beyond that, going to what philosophers call imperfect obligations to others, just general ways of improving the world as opposed to perfect obligations that connect up to people's rights. Why, there's no general agreement about this. We don't encode that in law. And why should we trust anybody to know how best to improve the welfare of the entire community if it's not just doing our business as well as we can? The people who are going to be the most confident about claiming to know are the people you should least likely trust with that, because they're the people who approach that with an epistemic hubris rather than the appropriate epistemic humility. They don't realize how hard a question it is, how much any question like that requires us to be quite diffident, quite humble. Realize that, look, it's a complicated question, maybe this, maybe that. If they come in and say, no, the best outcome is this, don't trust them. They're not in a position to know that. Nobody's in a position to know that. Finally, therefore, anybody who would substitute their judgment for the judgment of those involved in these decisions and claim that it reliably produces a better outcome for the society at large is untrustworthy, not only for epistemic reasons, because they don't evidently realize the complexity of the problem. They shouldn't have such confidence that they can actually reliably produce a better outcome. But also because that is the sort of person who is likely to have other vices. It won't just be an epistemic hubris, a lack of epistemic humility. It's likely also to be a vision that does not fully respect other people. The reason Smith derides it as an affectation, and that Hayek deeply mistrusts it, so does John Stuart Mill, is precisely because they think anybody who is arrogant enough to think that is likely to be arrogant not only about their own degree of knowledge, but also about other things. They're going to tend to think they're wiser, they're smarter, they're more knowledgeable than the people actually involved in making these decisions, who have the best position to know the most and care the most and have the most experience about attaining the best outcomes. Don't trust people like that. Once in a while they might be right, but it's very unlikely they'll be right very often.